So quite a bit of news breaking just a short time ago. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has appointed GOP Lieutenant Governor John Thune to the Senate seat that was vacated by VP-elect J.D. Vance. There was some discussion about Vivek Ramaswamy for that spot, but Governor DeWine has chosen his own lieutenant governor to fill it. And in Florida, Republican Attorney General Ashley Moody was tapped to fill the seat that was vacated by Marco Rubio, who is expected to be the next Secretary of State. As soon as that is confirmed, she will be stepping into that seat as the junior senator from Florida. So earlier today, I spoke with the brand new Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, who took over for the long-serving Mitch McConnell here on Capitol Hill in that same office. Now, we spoke about what Thune refers to as the hard and close votes that lie ahead in order to push through the Trump agenda. And we talked about the disruptors that have been chosen by incoming President Trump for his cabinet expressly to shake things up here in Washington, D.C. What does he think about that? Take a listen. How quickly do you think you can get them sworn in? Because obviously, once President Trump is in office, speed is going to be very important.
It is, and I think we're hoping at least that with both, and Marco, will be official when he is confirmed by the Senate, and he'll get in his new position. He doesn't, and I appreciate this, doesn't want to have a gap. So we're going to do everything we can to ensure that as soon as he makes that, as soon as he's confirmed here, that she is sworn in, and also the Ohio seat at the same time. Hopefully we're doing both, possibly as soon as Tuesday, but certainly as soon as is humanly possible, because we want to make sure that we're at our full 53-seat complement, because we've got some tough work ahead, and there are going to be some hard and close votes ahead.
So with regard to that, today it looks like the Laken Riley Act moved forward in the Senate with Democrat support. It looks like 10 Democrat senators were on board with moving that forward. Does that indicate to you that you may get Democrat Senate support for other border-related bills as well?
Well, I hope it's an indicator of that. The Democrats clearly are out of step with the American people. I mean, this open border policy of the Biden-Harris administration has been an absolute disaster. We've had 585 people apprehended either at points of entry or between points of entry that are on the terrorist watch list since October of 2021, and then all the criminal elements and gang activity and everything else that comes with it. And we've seen the effects of that. Laken Riley is a perfect example. And so we let out with that piece of legislation because it is so straightforward and I think understandable to everybody across this country. But I'm hoping what that signals is that we will get Democrats to work with us on other issues pertaining to the border.
It's been interesting and I think fun in some ways watching these hearings. You're hearing a very different tone from some of the Trump pick nominees. It's pretty clear that they're here in many ways to kind of rattle some cages in D.C. Let's listen to just a little bit of what we've heard this week.
Okay. It is time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent. We won World War II with 7 four-star generals. Today we have 44 four-star generals.
The partisanship, the weaponization will be gone.
We do not have a revenue problem in the United States of America. We have a spending problem.
Majority Leader Thune, is the Senate on board with the shakeup that they are all promising?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the president received from the American people a decisive mandate. It was clear that people wanted business as usual disrupted in Washington. And a lot of these nominees that he's put forward, I think, are going to be change agents in places where we desperately need that. Just the very fact of even the, DOGE effort is a scrub that's long overdue. I mean, this is something that this federal government has needed. I think of the 24 biggest departments or agencies of the federal government, last year, less than half of their office space was filled, and only 6% of federal workforces back in the office full time. I mean, so there's a huge opportunity here, I think, to reduce the amount of bureaucratic red tape and regulation and just bureaucracy and the weight of the federal government in ways that will hopefully streamline it, make it more efficient. And I think a lot of the nominees that you've heard from that the president's put forward have that as their objective and their goal. It's certainly the objective of President Trump, and I think a lot of these nominees are here to implement that.
You've been here during other efforts to do this that have ultimately not gone anywhere. Do you think that Musk is the change agent that can get this in action, that can actually make this happen, where you might see agencies dissolve from the budget?
Well, it would be great. It's always harder, obviously, than it looks, and some of these interests are very entrenched. You've got, some labor contracts. You've obviously got laws that are in place that in some cases will have to be changed to enable some of this. But as they do this, I'm fully supportive, and we want to be supportive in any way that we can of drilling down and figuring out how do we make this huge federal bureaucracy work more efficiently and in a less costly way. I'm a big believer in distributed power. In Washington, what you have is consolidated, centralized power. And I think you get a lot better government, a lot more responsive government when you distribute power out of Washington and get it back to state and local governments, governors, state legislators, county and city officials, and frankly, in the hands of the American people is where it should be.
Do you think we're about to see a shakeup, the likes of which you have not seen in your time here in Washington?
I hope so, and I think we have a unique opportunity in history. This opportunity doesn't come along very often, and sometimes it doesn't last very long. 2 years from now, we could lose the House or the Senate, but we have unified control of the government, which enables us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And I think a moment in history with a leader like President Trump, who is reform-minded, who brings a strength and a leadership style that I think enables the people who work with him on his team to do things that perhaps otherwise couldn't be done. And I think the country's ready for that. Yeah. I think the election showed that, and it's up to us here in the House and the Senate to do everything we can to be good partners and to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to get his people in place, and then to work with them, enable them to do the jobs that he's asking them and that we need them to do on behalf of the American people.
He butted heads with Mitch McConnell, and he felt at times in the first term that his own party was resisting what he wanted to do. Is that over?
Well, I think it's a different party, honestly, and I think it's a party that reflects the views of majority Americans. Americans were incredibly frustrated during the last 4 years with the open border policies, with this rampant inflation that's costing them over $13,000 more a year than it was when Biden and Harris took office. I think with the state of our national security and what's happening around the world, I think there is a big frustration with the American people, and they wanted leadership that is strong, that projects strength, not weakness on the global stage. I think they want somebody who is interested in achieving efficiency and cost effectiveness in our government here in this country, and that will put policies in place that will strengthen and grow our economy, not grow the federal government. And I think there's a huge difference there.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, but I want to ask you about the other hearings that are coming. I know you introduced Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, this morning for DHS. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, RFK Jr. Are all of them going to get through the Senate? Do you expect that they will all get approved?
Well, my job is to make sure they get a fair process, and they are. They're all having their hearings, and they're performing really well. And I can't guarantee with 100% certainty, but I feel really good about where these nominees are in the process. Some of them haven't had their hearings yet. Tulsi hasn't had hers, RFK hasn't had his, but Kristi Noem has had hers. Scott Bessent was yesterday, Pete Hegseth earlier this week, all of whom I think have performed really well in front of the committee. And so I'm hopeful that they'll get votes coming out of the committee, reported to the floor, and if and when that happens, I will do everything within my power to ensure that these people get installed in their positions and are able to implement the president's agenda.
Let's talk a little bit about the agenda. Looking back at Trump's first term, There was an ambitious agenda then as well, but his cabinet picks didn't get confirmed until several months into the process. And then it was decided to try to repeal Obamacare first, which ended up failing. The tax plan didn't start rolling through until the spring. So what would you say to people watching today about what it's going to look like? Obviously, I know you've said border, taxes, national security, energy, very important. What can people expect to get through this process in the first 30 days?
Well, I mean, obviously, Laken Riley is coming out of the gate. I think we're going to get a bipartisan, a bill that we can put on the president's desk that he can sign into law right away on that. And then we're starting to tee up bills that we think could get done. I think what you're referring to, and by the way, just to state the facts, the Obama standard for nominations, he got his first 12 noms through in 15 days. It took Trump 43 days to get the same number through. And we believe the Obama standard, we ought to get back to the Obama standard. And so we're going to grind hard as soon as they come out of the committee, and they can't until the president officially nominates them, which is Monday when he's sworn in. He'll sign the paperwork, the committees will get to work, they'll report them to the floor, and then we'll start grinding through them on the Senate floor. But my hope and expectation is that we can get a lot closer to the Obama standard than to what they did to Trump back in 2017 in his first term in office. So I think that it's going to require some level of cooperation with the Democrats. But on the bigger issues of what we can accomplish, the very fact of unified government enables us, because of a procedure called budget reconciliation, to be able to move legislation with 51 votes in the Senate as opposed to 60. And so you can do tax legislation there. You can do spending cuts. We hope to do some things on the border. We hope to do some things on national security and some things on energy. And there's a big question in this town about whether that's one bill or two bills and, what's the process and all the tactical decisions. But in the end, to me, it's about getting the result. And so how much of it gets done quickly will depend on how quickly the House and the Senate can sort of grind through what I think is a very big agenda. But in the end, we need to be measured by what we're able to get done. And whether it gets done in the first 30 days or in the first 60 days or beyond that is still an open question. But what I can tell you is the determination to work with the president and his team to ensure that, one, we strengthen the economy, that we extend tax relief so people aren't faced with a $4.5 trillion tax increase at the end of the year, that we renew American energy dominance in this country, that we rebuild America's military, and that we secure our southern border. I mean, those are all things on which we agree, and how we get there is still a function of the House and the Senate trying to work together, and we have very different rules and procedures and different cultures, but we're gonna get there. And
is there,
I mean,
obviously, there's been other times when one party had the House and the Senate and the White House. And often people look back and say, gee, why didn't they get all that done when they had all three?
Right.
And that is, I think that people who voted for President Trump and for all these senators who have the majority, if it isn't different this time, I think there's probably going to be outrage.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Well, and I think the American people, I mean, we all need to be held accountable. We all have a job to do here. And in my view, at least, the American people should expect that we will work with this president. And clearly, this is a different time than when he came here the first time. They're veterans about this. He's got a team around him that understands how to get things done quickly. There will be a frustration that it can't move faster. And the Senate, by design, the founders designed it that way. The Constitution made it that way to make it kind of an inefficient, deliberative body. So we have to grind things out, and sometimes it takes longer. But again, we've got a window of opportunity here over the next 2 years where we have the House, the Senate, the White House, a president who got to office with a big mandate from the American people, and who brings with him a style of leadership and a vision and an agenda that I think can make America, put America in a position on the global stage and here domestically, a place we haven't been in a long time. Then get it back on the rails. I mean, we have gotten off the rails in this country, and the leadership of the Biden-Harris administration on so many levels, whether it's national security policy, domestic policy, the economy, the border, all those things. This is a significant moment in time in which we need to maximize that opportunity to get some successes for the American people. So give us a chance to do that, and then we'll have to be held accountable for that.
Are you and Mike Johnson on the same page? You probably saw the article this week saying that you're not.
No, we're very much on the same page, and we meet regularly. We met earlier right here in this office a couple of days ago, talk regularly. And, you know, these are different. The House and the Senate are different. And I'm a former member of the House, and they've got a very narrow majority, you know, narrowest majority in history. And the Senate has its own rules and procedures and 60-vote thresholds, supermajorities to do most consequential legislation. So there are differences. By design, again, the founders made it that way. They didn't want to make it easy. They want to make it hard. But there's never been, I don't think, the kind of mind sink that we have right now in terms of what we want to get done. I think the Speaker, us here in the Senate, the President and his team, we are on the same page. And it's just a function now of how to figure out how to make everything work in a way that enables us to get to the finish line.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.